Um, I consider myself a fun employed freelancer, but I'm really no designer at all. At least that's what I keep telling myself. I'm actually an imposter. While studying engineering, I paid my way through school by convincing a bar that I knew web design. I had created a few GeoCities pages in high school, and so I was pretty convinced that I knew my way around. And I actually spent 4 years in school convincing Americans to come and get drunk in Windsor. As you know, drinking age 21 in the US, 19 in Ontario. So every weekend I'd fill Windsor's downtown with drunk 19 and 20-year-olds. It was very satisfying. It's better than going to volcanoes, that's for sure. After school, I started working at Engineers Without Borders immediately. And I suddenly found myself as the lead designer for everything from websites to annual reports. But the problem was that I was working in isolation through this whole time. I was embedded in the nonprofit world with no formal design experience or training, both of which I was convinced were essential for a role like that. This was a very high-will, low-skill time in my life, and it was extremely frustrating. No peers, no senior staff, just me and the world, forever alone. Now, I recently left that job after 5 years. Because I was looking to define myself as a designer, so I could finally say that I was. But I want to park the story for now. I've talked about myself enough, because I want to talk, again, about Twitter. Twitter, awesome. So, I want you to put your hands up if you're not on Twitter in the room. Hands up? Awesome, okay. I was worried to be nobody, so this is great. I was once not convinced about Twitter, too. My job is going to be to convince us that it can be useful. Now, to me, Twitter from the outside seemed like a narcissistic circle jerk. I don't know, can I say that, Vivian? And it still sometimes seems like that to me. My goal tonight is to convince us that it's better than that. You see, Twitter is actually a stream of consciousness that allows me to not only look behind the curtain at the design and creative industries, but also inquire and be curious about them. But why did I sign up for Twitter in the first place? And it was actually a very specific incident that happened to me. And here's a picture of the wonderful Jack Layton. In 2008, Jack Layton's Twitter account was hacked. And in the time that the hacker had access to his account, they let out 3 tweets. And I tell this story with the deepest respect for Jack Layton, his legacy, and his family. He's a big hero of mine. But the 3 tweets were kind of inappropriate. And I won't read them out, but they'll be up on the screen in a second. Now, I came up with a poetic anecdote about Twitter and how useful it is, and how Twitter can be the great equalizer for all humanity, as evidenced by these tweets. However, in reality, I just thought that it was a hilarious thing that happened, because usually I'm about 10 years old, and so I immediately signed up for Twitter. But that was 5 years ago, so in that time, I've gotten very acquainted with Twitter, and I've come across some really interesting phenomenon. Now, I'm not talking about the cheesy stuff that goes viral and then fades away. I'm talking about coming across the obsessive, delightful, and inspiring things on Twitter that allow me to become more of myself. I want to give you an example. This man's name is David Leonard. He's a Torontonian who, upon stepping out of a bar a few years ago after last call, on a night very similar to tonight, immediately had his contact lenses freeze to his eyes. So looking for a place to go, he went to a Twitter rant and decided to write about it on Twitter. It sounds like the Twitter I was describing earlier, but what was born from this movement is actually pretty remarkable. Pretending to start his own weather service, David attached the hashtag DLWS to the end of his tweet. And the David Leonard Weather Service was born. And let me tell you, it took off. People across the city started reporting the weather in real time using this hashtag. But the thing is, they did it in meaningful ways. So if you look at today's forecast, it's a high of -10, low of -24. That's how we consume weather now. But using something like DLWS is actually much more qualitative and interesting. Picture this, close your eyes. A cool, fresh morning, blue skies streaked with citrus clouds in Toronto's East End. That's how I want to receive my forecasts. And it's super practical, too. Last summer, I was having a barbecue in my back patio, and as the skies were darkening overhead, I was watching DLWS and watching the storm approach neighborhood by neighborhood as it approached my house, evidenced by the barbecue in the top right corner. I got inside with my food moments before the rain started in a fury outside. I'm also the first one to use notes, sorry. Now, this is all starting to sound like an infomercial, and that's because I'm trying to sell you something, Toronto. I want the David Leonard Weather Service for Toronto's creative community. A unified, correspondent-driven pulse of the creative scene in this amazing city. Not as it's forecast or scheduled, but in real time, without bureaucracy or ego or ulterior motive. Just an expression of the creative environment we're lucky enough to all be a part of. Twitter, as I said, is delightful and inspiring, and it's a great match for our creative community. I propose we call this space Create TO on Twitter, a record of the happenings and joys and quirks of our amazingly creative and collective city, the perfect balance between happenstance and hierarchy. Our creative schedule is jam-packed year-round, but outside of this structure, I've come across little that sews our creative fabric together. I propose that Create TO be our go-to year-round source of communication and inspiration. And it starts with all of you. There's also the question about how we bring our individual creativity to the sectors and industries in which we're all employed. Let's use Create TO to coalesce our embedded creative efforts in nonprofits, public service, and the private sector. Now, what can this become? Gatherings, beyond the hashtag, maybe even potlucks? I don't know, let's not get crazy. But when I first entered Toronto's creative community, I found that it wasn't a very warm welcome. And I want to change that for future people as they enter the creative community in Toronto. So, thank you.